Why do humans enjoy being scared? Every night, somewhere in the world, somebody presses play on a horror movie. They already know it's going to make their heart race. They already know it's going to make them uncomfortable. They might even have trouble sleeping afterward, and yet they watch it anyway. Millions of people do. They visit haunted houses. They tell ghost stories around campfires. They spend hours listening to true crime podcasts on their way to work. Some people even pay money to be locked inside terrifying escape rooms designed to make them panic, which is strange. Fear was never supposed to be fun. For most of human history, fear had a much more important job. It helped keep people alive. Imagine living 30,000 years ago. Once the sun disappeared, the world became a very different place. There were no streetlights, no locked doors, and no emergency services. The darkness beyond a campfire wasn't just dark, it was unknown. Strange sounds in the distance could mean a predator was nearby. A sudden movement in the bushes might be nothing, or it might be something that could kill you. In a world like that, fear was useful. The people who survived weren't always the strongest or the smartest. Often, they were the ones who paid attention when something felt wrong. They noticed the strange noise. They reacted to the movement in the corner of their eye. They listened when their instincts told them to be careful. Over thousands of generations, those instincts became deeply embedded in the human brain. Even today, a sudden noise can make your heart jump before you've had time to think about it. Your brain reacts first and asks questions later. It's running survival software that was written long before modern civilization existed. But that creates a problem. If fear evolved to protect us from danger, why do we spend so much time seeking it out? Why would anyone voluntarily watch a horror movie? The answer begins with something interesting about the human brain. When you're watching a scary movie, part of your brain knows you're safe. You know you're sitting on a couch. You know the monster isn't real. You know nothing on the screen can actually hurt you. But another part of your brain doesn't entirely get the message. As the music becomes tense, your body starts responding. Your pulse increases. Your breathing changes. Your muscles become more alert. Adrenaline begins moving through your bloodstream. For a few moments, your body behaves as though danger might be nearby. Then, the movie ends. The lights come back on, and your brain realizes you survived. That feeling of relief is incredibly rewarding. It's the same reason people enjoy roller coasters. If someone pushed you off a cliff, you would be terrified. But strap that same person into a carefully engineered ride with safety restraints, and suddenly the experience becomes exciting instead of horrifying. You get the sensation of danger without the consequences of danger. Horror works in much the same way. It allows us to experience fear while remaining safe enough to enjoy it. But some psychologists think there's an even deeper reason humans enjoy scary stories. They may function as a kind of practice. Young animals spend an enormous amount of time preparing for situations they'll encounter later in life. Lion cubs wrestle with each other. Wolves engage in mock hunts. Even human children naturally invent games involving chasing, hiding, and escaping. They're practicing. The threats aren't real, but the skills they're developing are. Some researchers believe horror stories may serve a similar purpose. Think about what happens when you're watching a horror movie. Your brain immediately begins solving problems. Should that character open the door? Should they trust that stranger? What's the smartest way to escape? Even though the danger isn't real, your mind is rehearsing situations involving uncertainty, risk, and survival. In a strange way, horror allows us to practice danger without actually experiencing it. And if that sounds strange, things get even stranger. Because not all fears affect us equally. Some fears make perfect sense. Heights can kill us. Predators can hurt us. Dangerous weather can threaten our survival. But some of the most effective horror seems to bypass logic entirely. Recently, movies like Obsession became incredibly popular because they tap into a different kind of fear. The threat isn't a monster hiding in the shadows. It isn't a serial killer chasing people through the woods. Instead, it's something much harder to explain. It's something that looks human, acts human, but somehow feels wrong. Most people have experienced this sensation before. You meet someone, and nothing appears obviously unusual, yet something about their behavior feels unsettling. Maybe their smile lasts a little too long. Maybe their expressions don't quite match the situation. Maybe their movements seem slightly unnatural. You can't explain it. You just feel it. Psychologists often connect this reaction to what's known as the uncanny effect. Humans spend their entire lives reading faces, body language, and social cues. As a result, we're remarkably good at recognizing patterns in human behavior. We're also remarkably good at noticing when those patterns are broken, and when they are, alarm bells start ringing. What's fascinating is that this fear may be much older than horror movies themselves. For most of human history, recognizing unusual behavior could have been important for survival. Someone acting unpredictably might represent a threat. Someone who appeared sick, injured, or different from everyone else could trigger caution. Whether those instincts still serve a purpose today is debatable, but the reaction remains. That's why some of the most effective horror doesn't rely on monsters at all. It simply takes something familiar and makes it feel wrong. And humans have been telling stories about things that feel wrong for a very long time. Long before theaters existed, people gathered around campfires and shared frightening stories. Imagine sitting beneath the night sky thousands of years ago. Beyond the glow of the fire was darkness. Strange sounds echoed through the trees. The forest seemed endless. In that environment, stories about spirits, mysterious creatures, and figures lurking beyond the firelight weren't just entertaining, they felt possible. Fear has a unique ability to capture attention. A boring story is forgotten. A frightening story tends to stay with you. As a result, scary stories spread remarkably well. Ancient civilizations filled their myths with monsters and supernatural beings. Medieval Europeans told stories about witches and werewolves. Cultures across Asia developed legends about ghosts and spirits. Nearly every civilization on Earth created stories designed to frighten people. The details changed, the fear remained. Then, during the 19th century, something interesting happened. Writers began transforming fear into entertainment. Books like Frankenstein and Dracula became enormously popular. Readers willingly spent hours terrifying themselves from the safety of their homes. Later came radio broadcasts, horror films, television shows, haunted attractions, video games, and eventually the internet. The technology kept changing. The formula didn't. Build tension, create uncertainty, trigger fear, provide relief. Humans never seem to get tired of it, and maybe that's because modern life has created a strange situation. Compared to our ancestors, most of us live remarkably safe lives. We know where our next meal is coming from. We sleep indoors. We rarely encounter life or death situations. That's an incredible achievement, but our brains didn't evolve in a world like this. They evolved in environments filled with uncertainty. Part of us may still crave that feeling of heightened awareness. Think about the stories people remember most vividly years later. They rarely talk about ordinary afternoons. Instead, they remember getting lost during a road trip, surviving a powerful storm, nearly missing a flight, or finding themselves in an unexpected situation. Moments that make us feel intensely alive tend to become the stories we remember. Fear does exactly that. When you're scared, your attention narrows. For a brief moment, you're not thinking about deadlines, emails, or chores. You're completely focused on what's happening right now. Few emotions force us into the present moment quite like fear. There's also something surprisingly social about it. Anyone who's ever sat around a campfire knows the feeling. One person starts telling a ghost story. Everyone leans in a little closer. The woods seem darker than they did 5 minutes ago. Somebody gets startled. Everyone laughs. Then the story ends. And somehow everyone feels closer than before. In many ways, that's exactly what our ancestors were doing thousands of years ago. The setting has changed. Human nature hasn't. Maybe that's the real answer. Humans don't necessarily enjoy fear itself. Nobody wants to be genuinely hunted by a predator. Nobody wants to face real danger. What we enjoy is the experience that surrounds fear, the tension, the anticipation, the adrenaline, and most importantly, the relief that comes afterward. Every ghost story, horror movie, haunted house, and campfire legend follows the same pattern. For a brief moment, our brains become convinced that something terrible might happen. Then we discover we're safe, and that feeling is incredibly rewarding, which means that the next time a scary movie makes your heart race, or a strange noise in the dark sends a chill down your spine, remember that you're experiencing something ancient. The same survival system that helped your ancestors navigate a dangerous world is still operating inside your head today. The difference is that instead of running from predators, we've learned how to turn that feeling into entertainment. Thousands of years after our ancestors sat around campfires telling stories about monsters in the darkness, we're still doing the exact same thing. We've just gotten much better at telling the stories.